Following back-to-back top 5 recruiting classes, expectations running high in Knoxville, and Butch Jones on the podium Wednesday at SEC Media Days. We bring in Mike Loveall of Last Word on Sports to help us chat it up and review the coach's comments. Mike, as always, thanks so much for joining us, and let's start right there with expectations. So the coach addressed them. Steve Spurrier, in a sense, even addressed them, talking about 7-6 at Arkansas and 7-6 at Tennessee last year being good for them, not so good for his team coming off 3 consecutive 11-win seasons. So we're going to start off with a little fun and your reaction to the "they must be doing cartwheels in Knoxville" comment from the old ball coach.
Well, Mark, thanks for having me. I think really that's Spurrier being Spurrier, and I really think that's as opposed to his days in Florida when he loved to take jabs at Fulmer in Tennessee. I think this is an effort to kind of focus attention away from the uncertainty in Columbia. So he's reaching into his old bag of tricks and kind of trying to focus attention elsewhere, that being Arkansas and Tennessee in this case, to deflect some of the attention around the uncertainty in Columbia. So I chalk that up to Spurrier being Spurrier, and he was right. 7-6 was, and just like Butch Jones said, was a little bit overachieving for Arkansas and Tennessee. Nobody's doing cartwheels. That's not happening. But 7-6 for South Carolina last year was an underachievement. So on its merits, probably accurate statement, but I think it's really more about the program at South Carolina than it was about Arkansas or Tennessee.
Now, Mike, the expectations, politicking is difficult for certain coaches because of the mid-range expectations. So if you're Nick Saban or Urban Meyer, they are what they are. They are to win the conference championship and contend for a national championship. If you're at Kansas, you have no expectations. So Tennessee's at a place where they have built, based on recruiting classes, based on the tradition, based on what's expected traditionally, what the expectations are, and the disappointment of the last 7 or 8 years. So how did the coach approach the expectations talk?
Well, I think he approached it very carefully. I would tell you that his multiple talks yesterday were really a balancing act. He absolutely embraced the high expectations. He said this is why kids come to Tennessee, is to have that expectation to win the SEC championship and compete on a national level. That's what the fan base wants to hear, and that's what the players want to hear. At the same time, he kind of caveated that, qualified that statement by saying that, look, our young kids are still young. He called both the offensive line and the defensive line unproven. Pointed out specifically that Tuttle and McKenzie have to perform this year as true freshmen for Tennessee to be successful. That's absolutely the case. So he really walked a fine line between encouraging the fan base and maintaining the PR momentum and embracing that expectations, but still qualifying that. The real key statement was we have to be a year better, not just a year older. So he's talking about that improvement from last year's multitude of freshmen playing to this year being sophomores, and they have to continue to get better, not just a year older. So he's walking a fine line there. He's doing his PR tightrope that he is so good at.
And connected, Mike, to the expectations, I don't think there's any question that you have to peek at the schedule when projecting how a team's going to do. Tennessee's in a difficult spot because the traditional rivalry, cross rivalry, is Alabama, and Alabama's been the best in the nation for the last 6 or 7 years. Tennessee always has to play them. Missouri's done an amazing job going 14-2 in the conference the last 2 years, but let's not forget that Mizzou does not have to face Alabama, Auburn, or LSU go on down the line in the SEC West until you hit those 5th, 6th, and 7th place teams for the last 2 years for Mizzou. That's been their schedule. So he did address the schedule, specifically the Oklahoma tune-up for the SEC and how that could prepare his team.
Yeah, he talked about Oklahoma being a tune-up for the SEC schedule. In some of my previous talks I've discussed the fan base is really excited about Oklahoma. It's the second week of the
Hey, Mike, if we lost you, hopefully you can jump back on, reviewing Butch Jones's comments concerning expectations. He said, quote, about Oklahoma preparing for the SEC.
I'm sorry, Mark. Go ahead.
All right. Go right ahead, Mike. I think we lost you there for a second. Go ahead on the Oklahoma and the SEC schedule.
Yeah, I think Butch. I talked previously about Oklahoma not being nearly as important on the schedule as those three key conference games: South Carolina, Missouri, and Florida. Those are the three most important. I think that's what Butch was trying to say yesterday. While the Oklahoma game's big, it will be a litmus test for us. It's not nearly as big in terms of wins and losses as South Carolina, Missouri, and Florida will be for us. So again, he's walking that tightrope. He wants to build the anticipation. Hopefully game day is going to be there. That's got to be the most marquee game on the calendar right now for week 2. He wants the national attention for Tennessee, Oklahoma, but he knows it's not the most important game by a long shot in terms of wins and losses on the schedule.
Going into last season, the offensive and defensive lines were completely new, completely fresh, completely young with no experience. A lot of experience coming back, youthful experience. We're not talking about 2- and 3-year starters. We're talking about getting that 2014 under its belt. Specifically, you got Tuttle, you got Khalil McKenzie along the defensive front. Butch Jones pretty much marked those guys as guys that need to prove themselves.
Absolutely. Again, he called both line units yesterday unproven. I think the defensive line is going to be in a little bit better shape. They've got a lot of quality recruits and a few guys coming back. Derek Barnett, preseason All-SEC, to anchor that defensive line. Kurt Magid on the end, playing kind of a hybrid linebacker and defensive end kind of role. So I think the defensive line is going to be a little bit better. The talent is clearly there. The offensive line, of course, last year, none of them had any experience coming into the season, and we went through a lot of injuries last year. So we really kind of had to piecemeal the line, starting different players in different positions. We do have a couple of freshmen who might impact the offensive line this year, but I'm still a little bit more worried about the offensive line and the defensive line. He did point out that having the combination of Hurd and Kamara in the backfield, plus having the running quarterback in Dobbs will help that line in certain situations. So, again, I think he's trying to qualify his statements there by pointing out some things that will help that unproven offensive line.
The weight of all these expectations can be difficult for a 19-year-old. I think Josh Dobbs can handle it, but I hope that he's removed himself as much as possible from the social media and all the buzz, because a lot is being placed on this kid. And again, I think he can handle it. At the same time, I would just love to see him go out there and play football and not worry about it. I know he's preparing himself. And not just Butch Jones, but his teammates are extremely impressed with the way he handles himself and goes about and learns from day to day.
Yeah, Josh Dobbs got a lot of positive press at Media Day yesterday and all throughout the week. Several of the SEC outlets are calling Josh Dobbs the new face of the SEC. Feinbaum and Spears, all those guys were raving about Josh Dobbs. The media loves to ask him questions about his aerospace engineering major. He was doing some internships with Pratt & Whitney. So he's a guy on the rise. His stock is on the rise. But the most telling thing was Kurt Magid, when asked about Josh Dobbs, says, hey, he's not just the quarterback of our football team. He's my quarterback. And when you have defensive players and other players on the team talking about guys like that, that speaks volumes to their leadership. And when you have a guy like that in control of the locker room, you know your program, at least in the locker room, is in really good hands. And that's the most important thing about Josh Dobbs.
That is a great point, because the coach knows what's coming out of his mouth and that he has to be supportive regardless of what's going on in the locker room. But when you can get the linemen up front and the defense to support the quarterback and come out and say, hey, this is a guy that we see working right alongside us, taking hits, doing the right things, and we believe in him, yeah, that's huge. Mike Loveall writes for Last Word on Sports, especially helps us out with Tennessee and also our SEC rankings this offseason. Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Mark, for having me. Always a pleasure.